and welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar and it's been a cracker of a news day this Monday. Well, let's dive straight in and tell you what's on the show today. Right on top, we're going to be discussing whether India Inc. can truly walk the talk and take the concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat beyond slogans. It comes on the back of a big announcement by the JSW Group that they will be paring down all their China imports. They're not the only corporates to have done that. So really, how realistic is this on a day when there seems to be a thaw, with NSA Ajit Doval speaking with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and reports of a pullback of Chinese troops from Galwan. But will the fight on the economic front go on? That's the first big story. We're also going to talk about living with COVID. Easier said than done. India is at number 3 in the world in terms of number of cases. Numbers are growing every day and they're hitting people working in manufacturing plants. Bajaj Auto was in the news for exactly this right now, and Rajiv Bajaj is very clear that he is not going to shut his plant. We all are going to have to learn to live with it. How feasible is that? That discussion coming up. And of course, the best of that exclusive Sajjan Jindal interview to ET Now. This is the only place he has spoken today. Don't miss it. But let's kick off with the first big story. Now, the JSW Group is not the only one who has pledged to shut out China, to cleanse itself of Chinese imports. There have been others as well. Hero Cycles, namely, has said that they're going to reduce and phase out imports from China. TTK is another company that has said it's going to do it. Now, all of them admit it will come at a cost. Let's first take a look at what that pledge is.
The path to Atmanirbhar Bharat has gone beyond just a slogan. Major Indian companies are beginning to put their money where their mouth is and pledge reduction or complete stop to Chinese imports. The latest to make the pledge is JSW Group boss Sajjan Jindal, who didn't mince his words in an exclusive interview to ET Now.
We as steel industry, we buy refractory for our steel making. Refractory is one of the important ingredients, one of the more consumable which goes into manufacturing steel. Earlier, we were buying 90% refractories from within India. Today, we buy 10% within India and 90% comes from China. Now, this is because the Chinese government decided that they will not export the raw material that is needed to manufacture refractory. And therefore, they put a clamp down and all the refractory companies went into China to manufacture refractories in China. And they export the value-added refractory fully finished into the world. And India is also part of that. And so we import from China. Today, we realize that the way the Chinese are behaving, it is not correct for us to rely upon the Chinese supplies, and we have to depend either make in India or from some other countries. So that is exactly what today we are working to see, that our reliance on China has to come down to nil as soon as possible. To start with, there will be some pain, which we as Indians must be willing to accept, because we want to send a message loud and clear that if you mess with us, then we are not going to do business with you.
It is not just Jindal who has decided to move to non-Chinese suppliers. Pankaj Munjal of Hero Cycles has announced that the company will reduce its China dealings worth about 900 crore rupees in a phased manner. Replacing Chinese imports will come at a cost. It is a cost that Indian businesses and consumers will have to bear. But some in industry are clear that there is no other way out.
Are Indian consumers willing to pay that cost? Will these bold statements go beyond the top-rung marquee Indian industrialists to the manufacturers and the MSMEs which form the bulk of those Chinese imports? What about some sectors where we're totally dependent? Let's talk a bit more about this. I have with me today Gautam Chikermane, Vice President of the ORF, Blaise Fernandes, Director of Gateway House, joins us on the show, and I'm pleased to speak today with Swaminathan Aiyar, Consulting Editor, ET Now. Welcome to all of you. Gautam, let me get your take first. And you know, it sounds good. A lot of this has been happening over social media. You have great statements coming in from top Indian industrialists. Do you think, first of all, that this momentum will sustain once things cool off, which they are likely to at the LAC? And that's when, top corporates will once again start looking at their bottom lines.
I think not. And even if there were to be some reversals, it would be few and far in between. I think this time China went a bit too far. And the collective patience of India with these tactics of China is now over. It is behind us. I think it is irreversible largely. You mentioned a few companies. I think you missed out the traders who are saying that we will not be importing any more Chinese stuff. You're missing out on consumers who are rejecting made in China, and several consumers are not, they are asking for labels if it's made in China and not buying it. So I think China has brought the national consciousness together on the economic front to say that, we are not going to buy made in China, we are not going to deal with China. How this sustains, whether it sustains, you have raised very critical questions. It will be dependent upon the companies and, of course, individual choices. But I'm getting a sense right now that there is no more constituency left in this country that supports China in any manner, give or take a few, for instance, the left parties or a handful of others. But by and large, the national consciousness of India is saying that no more China. We have already banned some 59 apps. I'm just waiting. We have banned China from functioning in our road sector, in our highway sector. I'm just waiting for the government to ban Chinese equipment in 5G and all other critical infrastructure. So that will be on the one side. And the consumer and the companies that are now rejecting China outrightly, openly, clearly, vocally on the other. So in my opinion, it right now seems to be irreversible, but I wouldn't lay my last rupee on it. I think there will be some who will continue to buy, but by and large, I think the China story is over in India. China has become a four-letter word in our country.
Is the China story over? Swaminathan Aiyar, is the China story over in India, as Gautam Chikermane says so clearly? And you know, I just before I hand it over to you, Swami, I just want to tell Gautam and our viewers that it's not a clear black and white scenario out there. You're right, Gautam, more and more consumers are asking where a product has originated from, but it's not necessarily translating into a loss of sale. It's maybe a hesitation right now, so it's still nascent. There are a large number of traders who don't want to import anything Chinese, but there are others who say give us some time. Swami, do you think that the China story is over in India as emphatically as Gautam puts it?
I hope not, and I don't think that's the case at all. It seems to be, because there is a border incident, tempers flare up, all kinds of passionate things are done, and India, no doubt, needs to send a message to China. But the message should not be one where you cut off your nose to spite your own face. So you have to be careful in what are the forms of retaliation you do. You talk of Atmanirbhar, making India strong. If you want to make India strong, it means that you must have cost cutting everywhere to become competitive. Now, if you say I'm going to boycott Chinese apps or some Chinese kites or candles or clocks, consumer goods, that will not make you a high-cost economy. It will not affect your export competitiveness. But if you say I'm not going to buy machinery, I'm not going to buy intermediate goods, I'm not going to buy various other materials from them, in that case, you will lose out to other countries which do. The ASEAN countries have as much of a grievance as India when you see what China is doing in the South China Sea. Have they declared a ban on Chinese goods? Absolutely no. So we will simply lose competition. So we need to be careful and selective. We need to say that, capital goods, we need to import. Intermediate goods, the inputs as far as possible. If you want to put some check on consumer goods, that is altogether more acceptable because that will not go into making you a high cost economy as far as concerned. Over and above that, I do hope, that we don't escalate on China. Already there are attempts to diffuse the particular situation. The troops have withdrawn. At this particular point of time, to go completely ballistic is going in the wrong direction. This is pathetic jingoism. This is not the way you should be going. So I said, there are other countries which have just as much as a grievance. They are not going over the top, nor should we. The Swadeshi Jagramans, people are welcome to ask individual consumers to bear a sacrifice by boycotting. That's fine, that's an individual thing. But at the state level, should we just de-link or ban Chinese? Certainly not in capital goods, certainly not in technology.
Okay, is there a case, Blaise Fernandes, for mega, companies, big corporate entities in India to start putting down a plan? And there is not just one or two, there are several who have talked about putting down a phased plan to reduce dependence. Pawan Goenka tweeted out a few days ago talking about how OEMs can perhaps reduce their dependence in the next few years. Do you think there is a case for that, even if it comes at the cost of compressed margins or higher costs for the end consumer, just to send out a message?
Before I start, let's try to kind of, I agree with Swami, you don't kind of cut your nose to spite your face. So if you see in the ban of the 59 apps, the economic activity apps have not been banned. It's the vanity and the utility and the strategic apps have been banned. So the government has taken a very calibrated decision on what apps they've banned and what apps they've continued to work. In the app world, okay, let's stick to that for the time being and then go to your bigger question. I think this is a great opportunity. There's very little Chinese money in the app world. The app world has got two opportunities. So first and foremost, you've got these 59 apps banned. Then you've got COVID. Take a small example in terms of education technology. The field is wide open. No child is going to school. Everybody is doing e-learning. This is the time for Indian companies to come to the party and ensure that across every state, across every metropolitan area, MMRDA, NCR, there is a huge market. What needs to happen in the app world, and I'll stick to the digital world before we go to the physical world, is you need to kind of oxygenate the market. And this is the time where the Navratnas of the Indian government have to kind of come with the kind of capital outlay. LICs, the insurance companies, the pension funds have to kind of oxygenate this market in the startup ecosystem. Big hurdle for a lot of people, especially in terms of angel tax and taxes on non-listed companies. We need to have a clear policy if we need to start,
Mr. Fernandes, I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to stop you there because I want to refocus. Mr. Fernandes, pardon me. I'm going to stop you there because I want to refocus. India has a lot of hurdles to cross before it can truly compete with China. We know that. We've been identifying them, talking about them, various platforms, including this show. I'm narrow focusing today. I'm limiting my point to big statements of intent that have been made from the very top of the creme de la creme of corporate India, saying that we are no longer going to buy Chinese. If we need some time, so then we will phase it out. Those are statements of clear intent. It is not that, let's, motivate our industry. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? That's the basic question. Do you want to comment on that very quickly, Mr. Fernandes?
It's a good idea, and we've got to be extremely kind of careful in what we decide to kind of take on or not take on, as long as there is a strategic interest to the country. So, for example, on 5G, India has the ace. We can leverage that with the Chinese. Okay, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of chemicals and a number of other areas in terms of those industries, two things have to happen. We've got to also get our local act together in terms of the taxation, in terms of labor laws, in terms of making sure that we are competitive enough, and structural reforms and a number of tax reforms need to take place. So just boycotting China and ensuring everything is going to fall like a manna from heaven will not happen till both it takes two hands to clap. So the government also has to get their act together to make sure that Indian industry is equally competitive.
Okay, now Gautam, I want to come back to you and just to respond to some of the points Swami made. So we know that this move is going to come at a cost. So Sajjan Jindal, for example, when he spoke with us today as well, says, yes, I know this is going to increase my cost 10 to 15%. So who's going to bear it? The company and the consumers will have to equally bear the cost. It's a sacrifice we'll have to make. He's very clear in his mind that that's the way to go. Is that really the model that must be replicated across sectors right now? Or do we also need to look over our shoulder at our other neighbors in ASEAN, as Swami says, to make sure that we stay competitive?
We will have to be competitive, but it cannot be at the cost of national security. Blaise just mentioned, and I earlier, Swami as well, saying that we should import capital goods from there, etc., which is all fine. How can we how can we allow 5G equipment to come from Huawei or ZTE? They may be the leaders, they may be the cheapest, but 5G equipment, just to take an example, it's a very intrusive equipment. It is part of a critical infrastructure. It captures all your data. If data is the new oil, then you are handing all your data, all your oil, all your treasure, everything of the 21st century to an enemy nation. I don't think Huawei Chinese companies should be allowed into
we know
any
that's
technology
unlikely to happen.
Or any other critical infrastructure. The point about companies saying, for instance, Jindal said it will take them 24 months. Some other companies it will take them. So there will be a little less amount or more amount. But I think the withdrawal from China is very clear and it's out there in the open. Economically, or seeing it only from the numerical and trade point of view, perhaps Swami is right. But I think China has gone too far. I don't think we can allow this sort of an intrusion and at the same time give access to China. Yes, there will be a cost. Yes, prices will rise. Yes, in the short term, some of the companies may become less competitive. For that, I think we need a different war, which is a war on our regulatory cholesterol. I think, and this is the time to clean up our whatever is inside the problems that we have created over the past 70 years in terms of laws, in terms of compliances. There are 1,500 laws that govern doing business. There are almost 70,000 compliances that business have to make. There are 6,500 filings that they need to make every year. These compliances change at the rate of 3,000 every year. In the last,
no, absolutely. You made this. I get that.
13 clients.
I get that, and you made that point. I get that.
So we need to introspect as well. At the same time, allow our industries to do what they have to do in the manner that they see fit. And the third leg is so we have the government leg, we have the industry leg, and the third leg is the consumer leg. At the moment, from what I see, I think all legs are withdrawing except the government. Government needs to get its act together in allowing entrepreneurship to flourish, in reducing power costs, in ensuring that the money flows are much faster than
it's very tricky to speak on behalf of a vast number of consumers. It's very tricky to speak on behalf of a vast number of consumers on whether they would be willing to pay for higher cost goods for the sake of reducing dependence from China, and whether that's a good idea. Swami, I'm sure you want to respond, but I just want to add another perspective to what you're going to say next, which is that this is not solely an Indian problem. And I'm talking specifically about finding alternatives to dependence from China. It's a problem that a lot of countries in the world are looking at right now in the wake of COVID-19, and countries who are now fearing that China is going to misuse its economic dominance.
The question is, are you going to go over the top or be selective? Now, if there are security areas, I mean, for instance, will you allow the Chinese into India in defense production? Perhaps you will not. because it's a clear security issue. Is 5G a security issue? As the current technology may be. I mean, with all our software, I think we should be able to provide safeguards. But at the current technology, if you want to put it off, it's okay. So certain national security areas, you can say no. Or as I said, I have no objection in those very simple consumer goods, or you say dairy products or a few other things. But as I said, be selective. Remember that, China in the 21st century may be like the USA in the 20th century, of being the country with the largest number of surplus savings to invest, with the largest amount of high technology which is available, cheap finance that is available. And in the 20th century, people were very, very afraid of being completely dominated by the USA. And at the end of it all, those fears turned out to be unjustified. You need to be selective. So I would simply say, go ahead with these limited measures. And secondly, grandstanding is fine. I mean, Mr. Sajjan Jindal would say, I am going to become self-sufficient in refractories. Refractories are not even 1% of the cost of making steel. So fine, if you want to do that kind of grandstanding, it makes you feel good without becoming high cost, that is just fine. All I'm saying is you need to be careful in certain key areas. Now, China, for instance, is a very cheap supplier of electrical equipment. Instead of banning it, there is a proposal that we will check the equipment to make sure it doesn't have various bugs which are listening into or which can incapacitate us. Fine, put in those safeguards. China is one of the largest suppliers of cheaper and cheaper solar panels and now battery storage. Will you do without that if you're going to have an aggressive solar energy program and you want to bring your power costs down? No, it would be a bad idea to cut them out altogether. Okay, there is going to be some import duties. I have always reservations about that. But okay, it is possible in theory.
What the question is. So, Swami, allow me to stop you, please. I'll tell you what the question is. That's the crux of it all. Can you and should you separate diplomatic and military confrontations with trade and economic relations? Should you separate them, as you seem to suggest, or are they inseparable in the real world? Isn't that the basic question that it all boils down to?
There is some sense in which they are inseparable. The point is not to overdo it. The whole point is to have a calibrated response, that you don't go over the top. The answer is, if there is one problem for that, I have this guarded response. If the problem gets worse, I'm able to have a higher response. If it gets even worse, an even higher response. Then if we have a settlement, bring it down. So it should not be driven by passion. Without doubt, there would be a relationship between economic ties and external affairs issues on something as sensitive as our border. So there will be a relationship, but play it cool, do it with a cool head. All the reactions should be calibrated, not only in the upward direction, but in the downward direction. Hopefully, we should work towards a settlement on the border and then cool all this passion on cutting out Chinese imports as well.
Gautam, just last word from you. I have very little time, but I'll give you the last minute. Once passions are cooled on the border, do you think that there will be a different calibrated view towards Chinese imports and not the heat and fury that you see today?
People who only examine their transactions from the prism of profit or loss or pricing or on these terms may go back. But I think a lot of water has now flowed. And I don't think this is going to impact over the next few years and not immediately, as even Jindal said. So over the next few years, you will see a change. The national consciousness is clearly against China. I don't think China has much space here anymore. I could be wrong, as Swami says, but I could be right also. So I think on that count, we may need to wait. The consciousness today says no. And I just want to repeat once more the national security point. Swami himself has raised it. Even on electric components, if they are going to be, and if we are constantly going to be worried that some spyware is going to be happening or some bug is going to be placed, I don't think this is a country that we want to deal with anymore. I don't think it's possible. And we are not talking about India alone. Let's take Huawei. UK, France, not France, UK, Vietnam, US, a whole lot of countries, more than a dozen countries are saying we will not use Huawei. On the other hand, the countries that are using Huawei are Russia, Pakistan.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. This is, yes. We have to. I've run out of time. I have to end it, but I take that point away as we wrap, Gautam, that this is now a bigger question that others are also asking. India has to answer it in its own context. I want to thank all of you for joining us on the first debate this evening.